This is an exciting panel coming up next. It touches everyone's heart because of images. And I am very proud to introduce Natisha Jean Saran for the Seeing Ourselves in the River, in the Mirror, in the World. Illustrators talk about the challenge of creating images that bring books written by Black authors alive. I might start crying because we all know our images are always not portrayed positively. So Nakisha Jean Saran served as the Deputy Director of Teaching for Change. She just got a big promotion and is motivated by her passion for social justice to positively impact and influence her circles both domestically and globally. She strives to present a mindset that focuses on equality and equity and is actively involved in community development, particularly as it relates to education policy, Haitian advocacy, and women's interests in politics and racial reconciliation at the intersection of faith. A first-generation American of Haitian immigrants, Keisha has lived in many parts of the United States. She arrived in the District of Columbia, Founds, in 2008. She holds 3 degrees in political science and a double alumni of American University. Keisha, have fun.
Yes, there we go. Okay, hi everyone. It's very interesting to be introduced. I usually like to not be the one introducing, so I feel what is about to happen for all of y'all. I'm going to introduce our panel and then set a little bit of a background for what we are talking about, and just again excited to be part of this experience representing Teaching for Change and the work that we do. It's funny because this part for me is a learning, and I get to be around family, familiar faces that I see in the audience that have been around the work that we do at Teaching for Change, so excited. So we are seeing ourselves in the river, in the mirror, in the world, illustrators talking about the challenge of creating images that bring Black children's books to life. And with me are 4 incredible human beings that I have gotten the pleasure to get more to know better as we've come with this panel. Some that you may know, and hopefully some that you will get to know in this process. So I'm going to briefly introduce these individuals because their bios and their lives could fill a whole day, and give them a chance as we begin this conversation to talk a little bit more about who they are. So starting to my right, well, everyone is to my right, but starting directly to my right is Ms. Jennifer Lawson. Again, wide bio, wide contributions to the world, and so I don't necessarily want to narrate the life of Jennifer Karen Lawson, but I will try. Born on June 8, 1946 in Fairfield, Alabama, her father, Willie D. Lawson, was the owner of a repair shop, and her mother, Velma Lawson, was a retired school teacher. She is the second of 5 children, Willie D., Frankie, and James, and Skylar. Lawson attended Tuskegee University briefly before dropping out and dedicating her time to the civil rights movement. She has worked with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the National Council of Negro Women, where she has worked on self-empowerment programs for rural women. She has also worked as the Deputy Director for an adult education program in Mississippi's Quitman County. Lawson eventually relocated to Washington, D.C., where she worked as Art Director for Drum and Spear, a bookstore and publishing company. That is where I will stop this piece, because there's a lot more that Ms. Jennifer Lawson offers the world, and we will get a chance to connect with her in a second. To Jennifer's right is Joy Jones, a trainer. performance poet, playwright, and the author of several books, including Private Lessons, a book of meditations for teachers, Tambourine Moon, which was selected as the best books for children by the Black Caucus of the ALA. A favorite of ours at Social Justice Books is Jayla Jumps In. Joy has spent time as a teacher, a trainer, and administrator with DC Public Schools, so education is not far from who she is, as she continues to serve communities with her work with DC Public Libraries. She's a dear friend of Teaching for Change and Social Justice Books, and I'm excited to welcome her to this panel.
Thank you.
And next to Joy is Justin Johnson, an artist, a budding children's book illustrator, GIF animator, and teacher. Justin is a recent graduate of Rhode Island School of Design with a major in illustration. He studied children's books illustration as well as animation. He is a Washingtonian, DC native, who is interested in historical and nonfiction stories. He is a scratchboard artist, but also loves to draw and paint, and he credits his mother and grandmother, both teachers, with inspiring his love of picture books and storytelling. And Justin, in front of Justin, is a book that he illustrated, Black Was the Ink, a book on Reconstruction told through the lens of a middle school student here in Washington, DC. And to Justin's right is Sheila Kreider, who we've heard her name throughout today's panel and the work that she has done to uplift the genesis of where we are today. Sheila graduated from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville and became active in the literary community of her native Washington, D.C. She was published in a number of small press journals, including the Greenfield Review. She appeared in the Ascension Poetry Reading Series organized by Ethelbert Miller, and was the founding member of Free DC, the writer's workshop led by A.B. Spellman. Among her many other contributions to the art world, as we've heard today, Sheila also helped to found the Institute of the Preservation and Study of African American Writing, again, a genesis of how we are here today talking about African Americans in children's literature. So to ground our conversation, we've been talking through this morning and having conversations and exhibits about the contributions of writers to children's books, and primarily the stories that we tell, the stories that are passed on. If you were here for the first panel, a great moment of just thinking about the stories are not just what we write, but the stories are what we're told. And so when we think about the creativity and the contributions, how we then are depicted in text and image is long after the history of how we continue to tell our stories. But there is a history, and there's something that is still living and present today. So I'll do a little bit of a background. African Americans were not only forced to endure stories written about them by white authors, but they also frequently had to suffer the humiliation of the images that were made about them and made in publications. When we think about media, when we think about cartoons, when we think about newspaper and other ads, right? And a book that has been mentioned, and we'll center that in this moment, is Little Black Sambo, written by Helen Bannerman, which served as a stereotypical image of African Americans depicted to white children and unfortunately black children as well. We also think about then not only the storytelling that is being written and then depicted, but then you have a history, right? There's publishers, there's others, and I don't want to veer off into the next panel that will talk about what it means to take agency. I heard a lot of the conversations and questions from that. But when we think about then this move, not just to publish children's books, but to ensure that the art reflected who we are and who we were in those moments as well. And there are challenges that come into that, and we'll talk a little bit more. To my left, you may be familiar with this graphic. It is a little bit older, but recognizing that the numbers have not changed that much. And so when we think about diversity in children's books, when we think about how we are reflected, some things that you can see on this graphic are recognizing that animals are more largely depicted than African American children. When we think about the ways in which stories are told and how young people can see themselves, again, if you are a marginalized community, you're not seeing yourselves in the various mirrors that are reflected of white children in children's books. And so at Social Justice Books, we curate over 100 book lists that really center the themes of multicultural and social justice for children and young adults. We take it seriously, not just the stories that are told, but also the way in which we are depicted. And so I don't want to enter in on a hard note, but just wanting to center where we are and why this session and this panel is so important and powerful. But as we come into this conversation, I'm curious for our panel, what messages does it send to Black children if the literature they read offers racist depictions or no depictions of them at all?
I'll start. I brought a book. It's kind of old now. It's called Barefoot. It's about the Underground Railroad. And it was written by a woman named Pamela Duncan Edwards and illustrated by Henry Cole, who used to live in this area, but he has since moved. And when I first encountered this book, I was shocked that a book about the Underground Railroad had two white people as the writer and the illustrator. And I've been on panels like this with Henry Cole. I like him and I like his work. He's an excellent illustrator. But when I looked at the book, one of the things that I found concerning, okay, now I'm not going to be able to find the picture, but at any rate, it's about a little boy who's escaping from the plantation and he's fleeing up north, and he succeeds in getting up north, but it charts his journey. And in the book, he's being chased by some patrollers. And in the book, they're described as the heavy boots, these men who are chasing him. And you never see the heavy boots. And so if you don't know much about Civil War history or slave history or slavery or anything, and if you're reading a picture book, it's pretty much a given you don't know much history, you don't get the racial aspect of this whole scenario. And I took issue with that also. It's a well-done book, and I don't begrudge them much for telling the story their way, but I think a Black artist and a Black writer would have treated that a little bit differently. They would have made different choices. I also found out that the author, she's actually a British woman, and she also wrote a story for children about the Boston Tea Party. And I'm like, the villains in each of those stories told the story. The Boston Tea Party, you know, the Boston Tea Party were people revolting against England. And yet the New York editor chose a British woman to tell that story. And then in the same thing, Henry Cole's people are from Virginia. And he has another book called About the Underground Railroad, also well done, where he sort of confesses that his people were on the wrong side of history, and I think this was his way to sort of atone for that. But it just sort of boggled my mind that a book about the Underground Railroad and a book about the Boston Tea Party, you know, why the editor made those choices and who she assigned to do that work. And it just amazes me that she couldn't find a Black writer or a Black illustrator in all of New York City or all of the country to collaborate on telling this particular story. So initially it made me furious. So that's how it affected me. But again, whether it was a white child or an Asian child or a Black child reading this book, they don't get, in my opinion, a full picture of what was going on when the story was being told.
And I came into children's literature. Can you hear me? No. Thank you. I came into children's literature from my work in the civil rights movement, and that a basic, sort of fundamental, underlying principle of what we were doing was that we felt we have to tell our own stories. that if we want it told right, we have to do it. And that was something that we just thought was so absolutely essential. And this started in places in Mississippi and in Alabama, and that I was a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee called SNCC, and that we had people like Julius Lester, who was taking photographs, but also was talking with people, local people who sharecroppers, and they would tell folk tales, they'll tell stories, and that we then took those stories and started printing them. And it was something that not only was it their story, but it also helped to reinforce the importance of their story by the fact that we would put it in print. And that later, here in Washington, a group of us who had been working in SNCC created Drum and Spear Bookstore and Drum and Spear Press, and that we were appalled at the sort of scarcity of books by and about black children, by black authors, illustrators. And so again, it was one of those things where with that attitude of, well, we'll complain and try to get agents and try to get publishers and things, but we're not going to wait on that. We'll do things ourselves as well. So we created then a book, Children of Africa, because at that time it was just astonishing the ignorance about the continent of Africa, or the ignorance about people of African descent in general, was just appalling. So we created a book that we saw as an effort to be a primer for both black families and black children, as a way of getting that story across. So that propelled us on this path of, if we want it, let's create it.
I think this is an interesting sort of layered question, in that, in response to what Joy was saying about searching for black artists and black writers, when I graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2017, we were still having the same type of conversations we're having today, and as you expressed in SNCC with your protesting, my friend Olivia Stevens, who's a black queer illustrator that most people should be following, led and pushed a protest on RISD's campus about the Room of Silence, which was the fact that there is no type of criticism given to black artists and black art when black students make work, as a way to sort of silence black artistry that happens at the school. And so her and I are close friends, and one other black gentleman made up the 3 black students who graduated that year from the illustration department. So when we talk about, are we in those rooms, are we in those spaces, I would say if the 3 of us weren't, then no. And in Massachusetts and in the Rhode Island School of Design, that was a big feeder to the publishers at Scholastics and other areas. So, when black people only make up, less than 1% of the population of an entire college or university, we're not going to see ourselves there. But what the takeaway that I had from that event, from that protest, was what you took away, which is we have to lead our own things. And I think what's interesting in that a place like Washington, D.C., where you get to see black people in all aspects and socioeconomic levels, a book like this that I think you are right is not accurately depicting historical events. DC is a weird sort of environment where I would have never looked towards that book for my information because Harriet Tubman's from Maryland. So I feel like a lot of the black and brown people in this area have so much accessibility to the historical events where you really could learn about what the real history is. But I think you are right. If you're not in this area, you are going to need accurate and correct historical depictions, and books like these don't do that. And I think it's because, like you said, it's people who are not, who are the villains and not the victims illustrating and telling these stories. And we're not in these rooms to tell those stories. We're not being picked to tell our own stories. And I think that is sort of what's causing us to have these same issues over and over again that spans, decades.
I want to go back to the illustration on the left there, because I think that it's a very interesting issue for me, because right now there's a focus on diversity and depictions of all kinds of people in literature. And I want to understand how that affects the representation of Black people in literature and in writing itself, because I think that it kind of detracts from what our contribution can be, which again underscores how important it is for Black people to take these things on for themselves. So, interestingly enough, I found a more recent statistic than the one that's shown in 2018. And in 2022, the percentage of Black authors, diversity in children's books, by Blacks is 13.4%. About Blacks is 14.2%. The indigenous statistic is 1.5% by indigenous authors. About indigenous authors, it's 1.7%. I mean, you're talking 1.7%. Okay, now this is the interesting statistic and the one that has changed the most, and that's in the Asian category, because that has jumped from 10.7% for books about authors. I'm sorry, it has jumped to 10.7% for books about authors, and by Asian authors, it's jumped to 18.4%. That's astonishing. That's almost a full 10 points. Latinx, it goes from 6.2% to 10.7% by Latino authors, and then the books about Latino authors is only risen by about a point, which is 6.8%. Pacific Islander is pretty much still in the point percentile. It's not even half a point. And that in itself is astonishing, just given how many people come from the Pacific Islands and live here, even talking about Hawaii, right? So I think that diversity actually becomes an issue in and of itself when you're talking about our contribution to literature, because it kind of gets obscured, and we need to see ourselves.
Thank you for the mic fix, if y'all can hear me better this time around. Cool. So thank you for laying that piece and foundation. And Jennifer, you had raised an important piece, right? The work of Drum and Spear helped to fill a gap that wasn't present. And when we were talking, one of the questions that I had asked the panel, and just thinking about these stories, right? Where is the genesis? Where do we start? Where do we see ourselves? What was a book or author or illustrator that inspired you when you were growing up? And you had mentioned, well, when I was growing up, there weren't these stories that were present. So I don't want to lead too much, but there's a particular story and author who Drum and Spear had an integral part in supporting. And so we're talking about Eloise Greenfield and Bubbles. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And Drum and Spear, in wanting to be true to Washington and true to children, African American children, then was always looking at who was out in our community. And Judy Richardson and the Drum and Spear was a community of people. There's no one person who represented Drum and Spear. It was a true community of people. And that in addition to doing the children's books, we also did a radio program for children that we had on as a weekly. And we would create all of these things ourselves. We were just making it up, as they say. But we wanted to also do something a bit more professional too, and that we were very fortunate then to have the relationship with Eloise Greenfield and the creation and the publication of Bubbles, and this was done through Drum and Spear Press. And I know that there's a panel a little later about Drum and Spear Press, so I won't go, go into that much, but I think that we continued to look and explore other literature and materials to include at the bookstore and as a way of then in schools. And for example, we did a book. People from a number of diplomats would stop by the bookstore and want to know how they could get material like that in Africa and then want to share information with us as well. So we also created a book of African names, for example. A lot of people wanted to name their children using African names, and so we had a scholar with Howard University who then worked with us to create a book of African names that we published. But Bubbles was a big hit as a children's book, and it was wonderful to see the professionalism, because what I had done with our Children of Africa was what I would call an amateur effort, since I had never even studied art formally. But it was just the kind of desperation of, we need to do this and we will do it. And we did. And it worked sufficiently that the people in Tanzania wanted to do a similar kind of book, and so we did a version of Children of Africa in Tanzania. But we continue to get books out like Bubbles and to have authors speaking at Drum and Spear, so that Eloise Greenfield and others then were present, and that other authors from out of town would also come to town and speak at Drum and Spear as well.
I'm going to keep you on the hot seat for a second. Because you talk about, as you say, being an amateur artist, but the stories that we tell, the art that we facilitate, right, in the space of publishing may seem amateur, but it goes a long way. And so when you think about how your artistry became more public in the work of SNCC, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And the point of this story really is, don't wait for somebody else to do something. Do it yourself, and do it with what you have, even if you feel that what you have is very limited. And my best story along that point is that Cortland Cox and I, Cortland is here in the room today, and that we were working in Lowndes County, Alabama. And at that time, Lowndes County was considered one of the poorest and one of the most dangerous places in the country. And the black people were in the majority there, but they had been so intimidated by racism and by violence that out of over 5,000 people who were eligible to vote, there was not a single registered voter in the early 1960s in Lowndes County. Lowndes County was on the route for Selma to Montgomery, and so when the march with Martin Luther King and others came through, they said, they're going to Montgomery. We need help here in Lowndes County. We want to vote. We want our justice here in Lowndes County. And they asked if SNCC would help and would work with them. And we agreed to do so. So making a long story short, we started working on voter registration with the people in Lowndes County. I was a student at Tuskegee. I dropped my studies to come and spend more time in Lowndes County. So goodbye college and goodbye scholarship and hello Lowndes County. And that we were doing that, and the people then formed their own political party, because a part of that was the question of, well, what are you voting for? Well, you know it's important to vote, but how do you plan to use the vote? And that became a great discussions with the people there, sharecroppers and others, who then said, it's about power. It's about gaining power, and the power to control our lives, the power to decide things, so that instead of having somebody who's been oppressing us as the sheriff, one of us could be the sheriff. And so in order to, then they sort of laughed about that. Some people laughed and said, how can you be the sheriff if you don't even know what the sheriff's job is? So we got information from the state government, and we converted that into comic books. So Cortland and I would write these books, and that I did my stick figure illustrations, and that we then were able to use that, though, as a way of communicating with people about what those county offices were. And people then ran for office, and that their symbol for the political party that they had, at that time, the state in Alabama, the white Democratic Party had a white rooster as its symbol with the slogan, "White supremacy for the right." And the people said, we need a mean black cat to run that panther, to run that rooster out of this county. So that became the Black Panther. And so the Lowndes County Freedom Organization had as their symbol a Black Panther. And that was the origin, in a sense, of the Black Panther that later then was picked up by people in California and other places. So you never know where your drawing skills will take you. And the most important thing is getting the work done. We did billboards and we got the word out, but it was really important to just get the work done. So illustrating is critical, absolutely critical, as a way of telling stories.
So Justin, again, I think the piece is there's a lot that goes into the children's book industry, but you are an artist first. And when we think about the stories that are told, even here in DC, right? Like DC has a vibrant storytelling, visual storytelling. When we think about the murals, the artistry that's here, the colorfulness, right? And so just thinking about that, probably becoming an illustrator may or may not have been like the journey that you were thinking of taking, but what does it mean for you to tell a story about Black community, about the community that you grew up in, one that you are still a part of, and the students that you connect with today?
Okay. Can you hear me? So, thinking about that question goes back to another story that I experienced. Okay. Okay. I was just saying that I think the story that reminds me of another interesting story, which was an assignment that I had in college where we had to do a story about like a number counting story, as you see in like certain children's books. And mine was about a girl on Georgia Avenue. And the representation or the reaction was not positive, and it led to something else that was a completely whole other different situation. But I think naturally, artists in general want to talk about themselves. I mean, I think that's what's most natural. And so I think it's extremely important for me to draw what I see every day and draw what inspired me to even make art. And so the person on the front of this book is inspired by a friend of mine. And you know, I see different students dress a certain way. I see the students interact with each other in a certain way. And so I'm just taking all of my experiences and putting that into my own art because I think that's what's most natural. And so I think, as I said this on Friday of last week, your job as an illustrator is to get across an idea. And you want to have that idea be the most clear, and you want the people who are reading or interacting with your art to understand what your intentionality is. And so you were saying that you just had stick figures. Well, did the people in Loudoun County understand what you wanted them to do? Well, then you succeeded. I think people distance themselves from art in a way, and I argue this every day as an art teacher, that like, you just need to start making. And like you said, you have to start making. And your making was so important because it led to the ability for Black people to vote at a time in which we literally could not. And so I think it's important to make art that represents who you are, and that will have a lasting ability versus did you draw something perfectly? Because that wasn't the purpose, and I don't think necessarily for us as Black artists and authors, the purpose is to create a certain aesthetic. I think the purpose for us is to get our story across, because we have not been able to, in the centuries that we've been in this country, been able to accurately depict our experience. And so our goal might not be making art in maybe a Eurocentric way. Maybe our art is based on accurate storytelling. And so we see classically trained Black artists and have since the beginning of art making. And so we have that ability. I just think that making art that's authentic to you and that's important to you is always going to be a very important part of Black artistry, and that's why art like collage is so visceral and so ingrained in Black artistry.
Thank you. Joy, I'm gonna tap you a little bit. So we hear the lens of the illustrator, the artist, but thinking about the storyteller and the relationship, or the storyteller and what you have as the visual, what does that relationship look like when you are then connecting, if there is a connection or relationship that is built between you and the illustrator that is now taking your visual public?
Okay, I've written 2 picture books. The first picture book was called Tambourine Moon, and as that process was unfolding, I asked the editor, when do I get to talk to the artist about what the pictures are going to look like? And she told me, nobody told you what to write, so you don't get to tell the artist what to draw. And the artist was a white man named Terry Widener, who has done many, many children's books, and he did an excellent job. The story I wrote was based on a story my father told me as a little girl, and when I showed the first drafts of the artwork to my father, in the book, it's set in Alabama. My father's from Selma. But anyway, I don't describe what the people are wearing. And when my father sees the man in the story, he says, I used to have a hat just like that, although I never described the hat. And then there's another scene that takes place at a church. And when my father saw the illustration of the church, which I don't describe, he says, that looks just like the church from down home. So the artist did his homework. He researched what Black folks were doing and how they looked at that particular point in time, and he did a very good job. I was pleasantly surprised and very pleased with the outcome of the work. My second picture book is going to come out later this year. It's called The Sky Is Not Blue. And because of my experience with the first situation, I didn't ask, what's going to happen with the pictures. But the editor said, oh, no, that's not the way we do it here at this publishing house. We want your input. So I made some suggestions, all of which they rejected. And the book is going to be published in October. Not all of the pictures have been done just yet. The ones I've seen, I'm like, okay, I'm not wildly enthusiastic about them, and I don't hate them either. There was one, when they started to ask me what did I want to do, and I began to say, well, what would be interesting? What would be a novel treatment for this topic? How would I like to do this? And the one idea that I thought could have had some traction that they rejected was the story is about a little boy who's drawing a picture, and it's a rainy day, and his teacher says, oh, here's a blue crayon you can use to draw the sky. And he says, well, on a rainy day, the sky is not blue, and he rejects the crayon. And throughout the story, he and this teacher are at odds with each other because she's trying to tell him to do X, and he comes back with Y. And so I thought, maybe I'll have this boy, he's a Black boy, and the teacher is white. That would be an interesting tension, a Black boy telling the white teacher she's wrong. And before I went back to the editor, I asked several friends what they thought about the idea. All of the Black men I asked said yes. All of them said, yes, that's an excellent idea. But again, like I said, when I presented it to the editor, they thought it would be better to make everybody the same race. The children in the classroom are a multicultural mix, but the teacher, who's the antagonist in this book, and the child who's the protagonist, they're both Black people. So you'll see the final results. And I have flyers if you want to see the initial artwork so far. The illustrator is a black woman. She's from Madagascar, and she's self-taught, so that's a little different. So,
There's a piece that you bring in, Joy, that I just, again, want to uplift Eloise Greenfield, because there was a tension that she also had with illustrators and the way that the stories were being depicted. And there's a letter that she wrote where she called what the art was racist. And one thing that she said, though, that I think is really important, and again harkens to the work that we do at Social Justice Books, is that she basically publicly advocates for her audience and for the audience who loves her writing to petition her publishers, petition the editors to get this work changed. And so when we think about how powerful and risky that is, both as a writer and then Justin, I'd love to hear just as an illustrator, the other lens of that. You're talking about a moment right now, and yet we're still, it's a piece that continues, right? And so I'm just curious, like, as you think about the advocacy that comes in and the relationships of publishers, as a writer, how does that tension work itself out? No big question there.
well, it's a tension that exists even if you were self-published, because you're weighing what your vision is versus what are people interested in seeing. You're weighing what will sell versus how much do I want to just express myself. I appreciated this company asking me for my input. Maybe my ideas weren't so great, and that's why you have an editor, so you have someone else other than just your own ego making decisions about the creative process. So there's a tension, but I'm not upset about it. We'll see how the book finally looks. I realize that I can't make every decision. So, you know, I'm willing to go with the flow as long as it's not overtly racist.
So I also was taught in school that I'm never going to interact with the author. That's what I was told is how the process of making a children's book works. I interacted with Michelle because it turns out that she was a Howard alum. My cousin went to Howard, but we interacted because the publisher decided that like she was going to give me some feedback, and then I had an art director that I would work with, so the process feels similar to any type of freelance work. But as you were telling the story about the race you wanted to make the teacher and the race you wanted to make the child, like, I think my initial reaction was like, yes, like all the, but I mean, I'm also thinking of it like, unfortunately, like someone's trying to sell a book, and I'm like, across the country, as we are starting to see books getting banned and, you know, the demographics of teaching, we didn't really integrate, or unfortunately, teachers weren't as integrated as schools were. And so you have situations in public school systems where you have lots of white teachers and a lot of black students. Mm-hmm. And so if you make a book where, like, you're, of course, like, I don't think that teacher would want to tell that story, have that read aloud, where that would really make classroom management hard. But, I mean, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, yeah, you're trying to sell a book. Like, you want the book to be sold. I mean, you want this book to be sold for lots of reasons, but you also want your story to get out there. And so, unfortunately, you're going to be told no. And I think at the end, it's not going to be because of like an artistic choice. It's probably going to be because of a money choice, because the illustrator, I feel like, has very little power or say-so. I don't think there's a lot of like, no, that can't work because I can't draw that. It's more of like, no, I can't draw that because I'm told I can't draw that. And so, I liked your idea, but I don't think business-wise I think they took a business decision there.
I want to give a moment that if there are questions for the audience, let's go, to give a moment for y'all to participate in the conversation.
Okay, I'm waiting. A comment, was it Justin?
Yeah.
Where is that Georgia Avenue counting book? You got me all excited. And I have another comment just for Joy. I didn't, that was really a comment, that sounds interesting to me, and I would love that. And go to the second one. When we had the fight with over Random House being banned, over nappy hair being banned, and I was in all these conferences, a word came up, a phrase came up, Brown 36. Evidently, there's a skin color called Brown 36 that any race can be used to represent any race all over the world. And I remember my editor saying, we should have chosen to use Brown 36 instead of what we did, instead of making the skin color obviously African American and dark. I just was mentioning, I forget what you said that made me think of it. No, you Joy, but you were talking about, oh yeah, for the teacher and the kid. Yeah, you use Brown 36 and you wouldn't know what anybody was. And you can read your own story into it.
Hello. So thank you for sharing your experience. I was earlier this year, I was at the Society of Children's Book Writer and Illustrators Conference, and one of the publishers talked about how rare it is to have a good, talented illustrator. And I do agree in that sense that, today in any kind of education in school, we focus so much on the words and the science and all of that. And right now, we're starting to see how important it is to have the pictures that matches the words. What are your thoughts on educating or just maybe like for those who are amateur or self-taught to elevate their art so that you match the people with a heart and with the skills that they need to produce better works?
Okay. Oops. I'd like to say that I think it's really important that people illustrate, that people draw, that people create new works, because when we talk about what's missing, whether that's history or whether it's fun things for children, there's so much that's missing in quality material for young people. And so I think that it's really important to create it, and that when you don't feel that you have the skills to do the creative part, then you can always band together with other people to inspire them to do the illustration. We can get a talented illustrator to do the illustration, while then you serve another role in really inspiring people to move on and to get it done. Somebody else can then help to find an agent, find a publisher. But I think the real point is, it's really so great to have so many people here today thinking about African American children's literature and what needs to be done. And then my question becomes, how can then we use our skills, our abilities, our different skills to make that happen?
I think as like an art teacher, I think that's a very triggering question, because I feel like sometimes in DCPS, or I just feel like I'm in my school, in the school system, but just also in general, my experience becoming an artist was very difficult because there was not that push for a higher level of art that I could achieve at the school level. I had to go elsewhere, like the Corcoran or Fillmore Arts Camp or other places to supplement that, and the Corcoran's gone now. So they don't have a pre-college program for that. I then went to SAIC, but that's in Chicago, and so luckily I had parents who were privileged enough to give me those opportunities and to do that. But one, I'm curious which person said that there aren't talented illustrators, only because I'm just curious, like from a publishing standpoint, because I can't speak on that. I can only speak as an illustrator, but I would say that there needs to be a push for that certain higher level of achievement. And I think we have the capability to do it. I just think sometimes that's not pushed, because I think of the amount of work and effort it does take and it being seen as too difficult, we then gravitate towards other easier solutions. And so if we did put our efforts towards that, I think we would see more examples. I don't think you should stop if you're self-taught. I think you should just keep going. You have to keep practicing. The only difference that makes somebody who's self-taught different from somebody who is quote-unquote taught is that they've probably put in, or they had 10,000 more hours of practice that they had and applied to the schools. But if you see an art program or class in your area, take it. That would make you quote-unquote trained. That's the only difference between someone who is trained and who isn't, is just whatever class that you take. But if you have more effort, if you are out there working, you're going to get those opportunities. So that's what I think would push you versus somebody who is allegedly this trained person.
So I just want to say, this is just so very nostalgic. I mean, Drummond Spear Bookstore was there long before Pyramid, before Sankofa, before Busboys and Poets, before Mahogany, before Black Classic. It was there, and it was there in 1970. I'm 16 years old, and I went in Drummond Spear Bookstore and purchased an African name book where I got my name, Nikichi. I didn't know the right way to pronounce it, so I don't pronounce it correctly to this day. I'm not sure if there was a pronunciation guide in there or not. But be that as it may, it was Drummond Spear. Kojo Nnamdi rang up my purchase. I remember that clear. I didn't know who he was at the time. But Children of Africa, that coloring book, I had a Saturday school for children at that time. I'm 16 years old. And we used that book. I'm just saying, it's just so very nostalgic. My grounding came from this DC community. All of the richness of everything that we've talked about here today helped to shape me into the person that I am today. So I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for this. So.
Hi, I have two questions, one based on illustration. Oh, that's not my best side. Okay. I don't like that side, so let me turn this back. Okay. Dang, when I want to look at you all. Shoot, that ain't my good side. Okay, so anywho, one is based on illustration, and the other is something Ms. Joy had brought up, reading. I think it was she that has brought up reading the books that are taught in school, I believe, and what we can read and what we're not able to read and those sorts of things. Because that's very true, and I think maybe it was you. In any case, it's true. In the public school systems, we have like very, very minimal books that are taught to our children that have illustrations that look like themselves and what have you. I wanted to know how, as a parent that's a very active parent in the school system, how I could be more helpful in that. I know when Zoe was in the first grade for Black History Month, I was like super excited, and she had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Hood, and she was a white lady, and I just loved her. And I was like, come on, let's read the 1869 Project. So she read it, the kids loved it, but I felt like when she had started reading it, she was kind of like, I don't know if I should read this, but it's an all-Black classroom, to your point. So I wanted to get more insight on how I, as a parent, cannot be insulting, but like bring things into the classroom and help our kids more, and programs like starting that too, because I'm all about that. So, do you want to? Anyone?
I'm yielding to a couple of active, in the classroom, connected people first before I jump in on social justice books. But Justin and Joy.
Well, I teach middle school and high school, but I would say my mother is still a public school teacher in elementary school and has been teaching in DCPS for the past 25 years. She taught at Shepherd Elementary, and then Janney, and then she's now at Brent. And so
They're all on my list on lotteries.
I guess I would say, like, like, what is your goal? Is your goal to teach all the students or inform or assist all of the black students in the class? Or is it to assist your child? Because that would make my answer different. I guess if I would say for your child, just keep doing things like this. Like, I think my mother would take me to possibly something like this. I went to the Children's Book Festival like every year when they still had it. That's where I got to see people like Kadir Nelson and Jacqueline Woodson and other black artists and authors and illustrators. And so I think that is what would help. Yeah, you could create or start different, like a reading club, a book club is highly underrated, but it would solve a lot, like for everyone, both for the teacher and for the students. If you just had a book club where you brought in the books that you want the students to read, and you guys read 30 minutes every day, it would make everybody's job just so much easier. This is now triggering cathartic because literacy is just such not being pushed, and like you said, with books being banned and the 1619 project probably not, leveled for elementary school students, just having your own outside book club would allow students to access the content. And I think also you get to have those discussions. You also get to talk about all the things that you want to, and then you have kids reading 30 minutes or however long every day. And so you can do a lot with just a book club. I think that could be big, and then you could have different assignments, drawing, or whatever related to that.
And you're speaking on like a personal level.
I think a book club. I think if you had like an after-school book club for the class, that could be really important.
Okay.
Especially if that's not a part of the class. And I think DCPS is not pushing towards the type of literacy program that I had as a student, and so I think that could assist you in that way. But yeah, you can have an after-school book club that would provide the supervision that you would want and other parents would want as they get off of work. It would allow for students to have that type of help with literacy. It could have homework help. Like, a book club is underrated and I think could help. And it could, again, allow you to bring those books that look like them, and you guys could discuss those things, because another thing that a book club could do is that children don't really have their opinions heard, and so allowing them to talk and express their ideas where they don't often feel that way could also help.
Yeah. Joy, my second question was based on illustration, but if you were about to go ahead.
I'll just say a couple of quick things. To help your child on a personal level, model the behavior that you want the child to imitate. My mother, also a school teacher, she would read every word of the Washington Post religiously. She still does to this day. And then if I wanted to see something that looked interesting, no, get away. That made me want to read it more. So model the behavior that you want her to imitate. And secondly, limit screen time.
Which I do.
I'll just also offer that at Social Justice Books, we have more than a couple. There are bookmarks at the back of the room if you would like to grab some bookmarks, but as I mentioned, we curate over 100 book lists for children and young adults on themes of social justice and multicultural identity. So when you think about like what books are showing up in the classrooms, what books are available, even just to like open the eyes of your teacher, I think that piece is really powerful and important when we talk about the current state, of education. I could go into that tangent, but that's not why we are certainly here. But parents being involved, community being involved, raising the stories that we don't get to see and the stories that are so necessary for us is part of where you can show up and others can show up. So please grab some bookmarks in the back. We can talk about it after, but just raising
Yeah, because that was perfect. I do want to ask about the illustration because this one loves to draw, and I'm not artistic at all, and I'm always just like, you have to learn how to do it this way. Like, I think you spoke to that, like, let them do whatever they want to do. So are there any particular programs or classes or is there anything I can be doing? I had an art and lemonade stand for her, and that went off well, but does it have to be like Does she need structure or what have you?
I would say like in the first early stages of just drawing, like depending on, I'm guessing, is your child 8 or 9?
9, you're right.
Okay. Just draw, just have fun, because it could be discouraged and ruined very fast. So like just keep doing what you want to do. I would say look for those programs. I know there's a program in Mount Pleasant when students are in going from middle school into high school that is like more structured with like model drawing and all those things specifically. But I think right now just draw. Like I didn't have any type of quote unquote formal training until like middle school and high school. And I went to art camps, but I think you just want exposure. Like my parents took me to the Phillips Collection or the National Gallery of Art. And so I got to see other different artists and look at works like Jacob Lawrence and Romare Bearden. And so just have fun making art, because once you become an adult and once you have to make art for like money, it's not as fun. And so, and so you are going to also situations where you have to take something that you love and have to like add capitalism to it. So I wouldn't rush to do that. But I would also say that like Duke Ellington, like that's a school that is a very robust art school. And so as a high school, that would be something that I would look towards. I think when you get to the middle school, high school age, that's when things start to pick up. And just like in any field, that's where you start to add your interest in like add to it to make it a professional level. And so I would say you start there. But if you're in 4th grade, just enjoy making art.
Okay.
You're in 4th grade. I don't think you should worry just yet.
Okay, thank you.
So we have these 2 questions, and I want to also give Sheila a chance to enter the conversation as well.
Okay, once again, I'm Elder Dr. Jacqueline Norris. One of the things, I'm dating myself, back in the 60s, there were illustrators, but they were called comic books. And you think about Lorton, when a lot of the guys who were having issues, they would draw images of themselves. So illustration is not new. What you have found is the language and the stealing of the ideology with other groups have made it appear that you are new. But in essence, they are new to stealing you. And then the other thing I want to say, I'm dating myself because I grew up in DC. Black teachers brought in black books. A lot of times when people are asking questions about illustration, what I was taught that they are trying to steal your ideology and your way of doing things so that they can emulate you. And sometimes you have to look deeper in language. I try not to say nothing, but I just can't. And then I have children and grandchildren. My son, at the age of 4, painted me because I was mad at him. Whenever I was mad at him, he drew. Now his son is an artist, went to the art school in Philadelphia with all the Jewish people are, but anyway. But anyway, they tried to steal his stuff, but grandma came. Understand what I'm saying? So you have to be careful in how you allow our information to be mimicked and stolen by others. And that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Gimbia, and I'm here as both a parent and a writer, and very early on my writing journey. One of the things that I find myself thinking about a lot is when you guys are speaking, and you're talking about Burning Spear, and you're talking about some of these spaces that were very safe spaces, spaces where that middle ground wasn't so white. I think, we can talk about who are the readers, who are the teachers, who are the creators, but that middle ground, those gatekeepers. Where can I look today for those gatekeepers? Because I'm honest, I went to a historically white, I guess they call predominantly white university, and they pointed me to all the white spaces. I'd like to just really appreciate being pointed to some spaces where it's not as white.
And I know our time is limited, so I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I think it's what I have done through the past. I have banded together with other like-minded people to create book groups where we would sort of authors groups or to write, and we did it with screenplays. We've done it with books and things where then a group of us then just become a support group for each other to then say, I'm trying to write this particular kind of book, and we work together, and that has become quite helpful in finding additional resources to then find agents and other things as well.
From a writing perspective, I know Hurston Wright Foundation is one that has taken on other spaces of supporting writers in different ways, so I definitely encourage that as well. And then Justin, sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you told me a brilliant story of your banding together with community and creating that space that I think should be shared in this room as well.
Yeah, so again, being born and raised in DC, I also went to a PWI, and like I said, I was only one of 3 black people to graduate from my class, so I also did not find that space. And I guess I would still be looking for that space of illustrators currently, but when I came back to DC, I ran into people I went to high school with, and they were creating art and doing different things where they were allowing artists to make a space. It's called the Pack World, and so they make certain stickers you might have seen that say Chocolate City, now 30% less black. Yeah, and so that, those people allowed me to make the work that I made. And so I have only been able to make work at all because of people who look like me. And so, like I would agree that you have to make your own spaces, unfortunately, if you don't see spaces like that for you. And so finding like-minded people or trying to interact with people who are also authors and black writers, I think would be the thing. And I guess like, it feels like shouting into the void, are there other black authors out there who could help me? I think it's what you would need to do maybe via social media or trying to reconnect with other people. But yeah, I think that would be my approach.
Hi. I was an educator here in DC as well as, well, early childhood educator. I taught pre-K and as well as a teacher, coach, and trainer. I'm no longer an educator here, and now I'm writing curriculum. As a part of my project, or the work that I'm doing, our goal is that 70% of the books are representative of black and brown children. And so on my end, I had to find books that were reflective of black and brown children, and I had a certain timeline. In doing so, I'm feeling the stress and the pressure of finding good books. And to my own ignorance, I was excited. I found a few books. I was like, oh, great. You know, I see black and brown children. The stories are reflective. They're realistic. Our kids are going to love them. And then when I presented them to some of my supervisors, the professors in the project, they said, well, the authors are not of color. And it was, for me, heartbreaking and eye-opening because, one, the pressure of trying to find good books, but then once I found them, like, they're not even by authors of color. And so when you shared the book a moment ago here, it just kind of pushes through that whole theme that's already out there. And so in my work, it has made it, a mission of mine to make sure that we're getting books in the curriculum that are reflective for our children to see that your stories are real, your story is real, but you're capable of telling your own story. And so we're encouraging teachers to not only read the book, but to show the picture of the author and to show the picture of the illustrator at the beginning of introducing the book. So the point that I want to make too with this is, in finding books, there are lots of books out there from authors and illustrators of color, but they're not in circulation. So I would find a book and then like, oh, that's not in circulation. So then I had to throw that to the back and look at books that are in circulation so that it can be a part of the curriculum. I don't know if that's a question or what can we do, but that's just kind of like where I'm at in my journey and how I can be an advocate and just really getting our children to see good books in the curriculum.
I just say that I think that what you said is so much our reality, and that we just really have to be advocates. That was one of the words that you were mentioned. And I think we do have to be advocates for our children, for ourselves, for our future. And that's so important right now in this time when in many states they are trying to ban books that even mention people of color and or mention kids who are gay or lesbian. And so I think it's really important that we serve as advocates to get good quality children's literature in the schools, in the library, keep them in the library. And we're fortunate that while some of these things are not happening in our city of Washington, D.C., you cross the state line into Virginia, and it's beginning to happen. It's happening there, or in many other states around the country. So I think it's important for us to serve as advocates, and the lovely thing is that there are groups like Teaching for Change and Sin Education Project that have been doing this kind of advocacy work for years and can help us with this. So I think that it's been great to be here and to see a really dedicated group of people who are interested in quality children's literature, because we need it. We desperately need really good books for our kids.
And Sheila, final word.
I think I'm going to make two comments, and the first one is related to Joy's story about the teacher illustration. And I think that what has not been pointed out about that example is it's mind control. You understand, is that we can't show this image because it suggests the way we do not want you to behave. Okay? It's very, very deep. But we have to look at how we project ourselves into a situation and the behavior that it illustrates, and how these kinds of rebellions, okay, aren't allowed. They would never present a black child, especially not a black boy, talking back to a white teacher, okay, because it's just not acceptable. So I think that that brings us to our second point in terms of community, because what I heard on this panel is that we all have to band together to be our own advocates, that we have to work towards the things that we want to see in the books, as illustrations, as literature. And I think that it's very important that writers and illustrators or painters, artists, whomever, that they band together and submit manuscripts that are complete, not text alone, but text with illustrations, so that that way you know who's doing the drawing, you know who's giving the image, and you go in and you say, this is a package, this is what we want to see. And that way we change what's available on the market. And I think that that's very necessary in this day and age, and is something that we needed, from 1900s, early on. So that's, to me, the bottom line. Community.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel. Thank you all.